what the hell? Let's do it.
That's the spirit. To quote the great Joseph Campbell, he said, "It is by going down into the abyss where we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble, there lies your treasure." To the ironic twist of the unknown. Bottoms up.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Happy heresies and welcome to the desert of the real. As always, welcome so much to Aeon Byte. This is where you find out who you are, and this is where you find out where reality is not. You are that ship smoke on the horizon, as Pink Floyd sang in Comfortably Numb. But there is no getting numb here. There is only becoming awake to reality and the potential that you truly are with that old-time gnosis. My name is Miguel Connor, your pompatus of gnosis, and that madman across the waters of creation. And I hope everybody's having a good Friday, and hope everybody's ready for the weekend to do what you need to do to continue tapping into the richness that is our lives. And today I am very excited to be joined by Cyrus Ryan. Cyrus, thank you very much for coming on the show. Truly an honor and a pleasure.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed your introduction with all the pyramids, excuse me, and the Egyptian motifs. I had traveled a lot in India and Tibet and places, but until I went to Egypt, and it just brought all my memories back watching that, what was on the screen. And Egypt is amazing for anybody. If you haven't been there, it is really something. I traveled all the way. I'm sorry?
Certainly on my bucket list to get to Egypt. I can only imagine.
Traveling from Aswan all the way down through Alexandria, with all the different antiquities, and being somewhat sensitive in a psychic sense, I was very surprised that walking in certain parts of these ancient temples, that parts of them were still alive. You could be walking and everything feels normal, and all of a sudden, as if you walk through a seal, and all of a sudden something was alive and still active in this ancient, especially in Karnak, which is in Luxor, the old Thebes of ancient Egypt. There were a lot of very interesting things from a clairvoyant, esoteric aspect. That wasn't on our topics, I know.
But no, I think it's a good reminder. It's a good reminder of the seat of consciousness and human consciousness has to be Egypt. It's the font. It's
a lot of very strong negative forces too, and one has to be very conscious of it. But if you're not psychic and you're not aware of these things, just the beauty and the majesty of the antiquities, the pillars, the pyramid, they just blow your mind. Even when you see them from a distance, and as you get closer and closer, you feel excited. So I highly recommend it.
Indeed, for sure. Yeah, I think I just saw somebody put on the chat, Miguel and Vance come to Cathar Astronosis in France and Egypt next year. Actually, yes, there are seeds of doing this. We want to get ambitious. So stay tuned. And it's something that I've been working on with other figures, but so I can get to Egypt and Alexandria, and somebody who still hasn't been to Alexandria, but it's always at the Virtual Alexandria, and that is the Moondog Vance. Vance, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm fine. Actually, a few years ago, I was in Alexandria, Virginia.
Oh, excellent.
Well, that's where Jim Morrison lived.
Yeah, it's a special place, actually. So we're going to ask Alice today, I guess. And I kind of bailed on Bailey years ago because when I tried to read it, and I hadn't had as much reading as I have, these days, but it was so thick, I just could not get through it. So I'm looking forward to having some of that elucidated today.
Oh, indeed. Cyrus is the man. And yes, I have been to Memphis, but that's Memphis, Tennessee. Ha! Had to match your joke, Vance. So I did see where the Pharaoh lived at Graceland, but and indeed, Elvis did tap into a lot of Egyptian magic, as I show in my upcoming book, and he did read Alice Bailey. In fact, in the 70s, Vance, he did try to use some of Alice Bailey's esoteric healings when his health was going to hell. He could have stopped doing drugs and eating better, but no, let's go for Alice Bailey and the really magic stuff. You know how mystics sometimes don't think logically, right, Vance?
Yeah.
We go woo-woo instead of just healthy living.
I read that Colonel Parker was so against his looking into the occult, and actually got some of his bandmates and other friends to sort of make fun of him so he would turn his back on it, which was so unfortunate. But I read that, so I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, no. Parker was against it because Elvis was threatening to become a Buddhist monk, and he lost his appetite for performing, for sex. I mean, he really was going down that path. And Priscilla, the colonel, his bandmates, well, this is our meal ticket. So there was a concerted campaign, and of course that included vilifying his spiritual teacher, Larry Geller, in many ways, saying, oh, he's trying to scam you and this and that. And behind their back, they would insult them and call them, anti-Semite names, all behind Elvis's back, because obviously you even the colonel wouldn't challenge him directly. Nobody did. But you know how these courts are, behind his back. They did, and it did work. It did work. It kind of worked, but Elvis went underground. He started hiding his books, his Theosophy books, in his Vegas suites and other places, and he just started doing it away because he told Priscilla, oh, okay, I'll marry you, and she's like, well, you got to please, no more of this dark stuff or occult stuff. Let's be like Christians. So he kind of went underground. So I got it all in the book. You'll see.
And very interesting. It's very unfortunate, but from an esoteric point, why is Elvis so popular? So seemed clairvoyant. He had a Gandharva with him. Gandharva adds beauty in appearance, as he was very handsome. It also makes him magnetic and accentuates the voice. And you can read in ancient Hindu stories about these Gandharvas and how they were used. So many of these stars that have a more, how would you say, power and effect on the populace, especially the women, and with Elvis, they're not just a regular human being. They have I use the term an extra. They got something added into their aura, left over from past lives, that they carry with them, that create this magnetic. Of course, on certain politicians, you see the opposite. They have certain what they call asuras, which are beings of high intelligence and power, but with no heart, and makes the politician very powerful and hard to defeat. But that's from the occult aspect of things.
Yeah, no. I mean, Elvis was 100% with the idea of the masters and the white brotherhood and all that. He was, and he did practice a lot of the techniques from the literature he had at the time, early mid 60s and so forth. But yeah, you can pre-order the Elvis book. I need to mention that more. My publisher wants to keep mentioning it is there for pre-order if you want to get it out April. But interesting how this all connects. So Cyrus, let's start. I don't know where you want to start. I know a lot of your work has to deal with, I don't want to say reclaiming Theosophy, but it kind of is about reclaiming Theosophy, about the ideas, including in your videos, your website, the idea that this is Theosophy, this is Blavatsky, and this is the masters. You say that's one of your goals you're trying to clear up?
In a certain respect, not the Theosophical Society, but Theosophy as a ancient wisdom that's a synthesis of both the Brahmanism or Hindu Sanatana Dharma of old and Vajrayana Buddhism, trying to synthesize his teaching and making it more applicable for the Western mind. I don't look at Theosophy as many traditional theosophists look at Blavatsky. Theosophy is Blavatsky. No, Blavatsky was the first wave. She's what they call an initiate, a very advanced initiate, but she only gave out the teaching she was directed to give out. She knows a great deal more, but she does not release that kind of knowledge. And then when her particular period was over, we call it the second wave, came through Alice A. Bailey. But the teachers on the inner plane, especially the three masters, the master M or Moria, master Kutumi, and the master DK, known as the Tibetan, were the three main masters that initiated and drove this teaching, directed primarily at Europe and North America, not so much in the East, because there's a different dichotomy there. They sort of follow or are part of that push that started back in around 800 AD when the great saint or Tibetan saint Padmasambhava, in one of his famous quotes about the wing, the iron wing, the wing of the iron bird, when it casts its shadows over the land of the snows, the Dharma will move west. And thus moving the Dharma or the esoteric teaching to help break down the superstitions and the belief in a lot of the religious fairy tales that exist. People just love fairy tales, like still looking for things like Garden of Eden, etc. When they're psychological states, they're not physical states. Or Noah's Ark. The ark represents a seed. There was no real ark. There were floods. That's the sinking of Atlantis in various different levels. Right. So I just wrote a little article about the Theosophical Society being more in a coma because the masters have withdrawn a long time ago from the Theosophical Society, and there have been no initiates there. The only beauty of the Theosophical Society, like you have a big center outside of Chicago in Wheaton, Illinois. I was there a couple of years ago. The grounds are beautiful. The building is beautiful. But again, being very sensitive and psychic in a way, I was so disappointed that the halls and the inside was empty. There was no external force. Even some churches you walk in, you feel something. That means there's a presence of a deva, or people like a guardian angel over that area. But in Theosophy, it was nothing. Great library, so you have a lot of knowledge available, but there's no overshadowing force anymore. But Theosophy as knowledge represents a very deep knowledge. And as Moondog mentioned, that the difficulty of reading, like Alice A. Bailey, it is difficult. It is not for beginners. And it's written in many different layers. It's written for the layer of person of high intelligence who wants to get some insights. Then it's written also, and you see it differently, for somebody who begins practicing meditation. But it's also written for those that are awakened or initiates. They will read and find different types of information. So there are secrets in those books, but it's hidden. And the Master DK, who gave that knowledge through Alice A. Bailey, he's a master spiritual engineer of words. And he uses a method called the scatter method. He can say one thing in one area and give an idea. Well, I don't want to say too much more on this. But you go in another book, it picks up the same string and it goes deeper. So It's just like if you're going to be a lawyer or a doctor, you have your own languages. There is a certain esoteric language. Those books written in 1919 to 1947, you have to think of what America and Europe was like then. So there was still a strong Christian or Judeo-Christian element that was still, well, up until about the late 60s, early 70s, it was the predominance. So there isn't a lot of Sanskrit. He has to use English, and Alice Bailey was a very strong Christian. So it has some of those elements in it. Mm-hmm. But he hides things. For instance, there's a very esoteric teaching called the 5 Buddhas of Transformation, or the 5 Dhyani Buddhas. There is only vague knowledge and books about it. There's only one book that goes a bit deeply by The Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism by Govinda. He wrote that because he had a real lama in India who was advanced and had magical powers. And he was fortunate in the 1930s to meet this lama, who was known as Tomo Geshe Rinpoche. The only reason that Tomo is a valley in Tibet, and they call him Tomo Rinpoche, is they found him meditating in a cave in Tomo Valley, and they named him that because he wouldn't tell them anything. But he did teach, and he built quite a number of temples and stuff. But the lamas, the general lamas, got very angry that he allowed Govinda to write this book, which gives some insights into the 5 Dhyani Buddha. But you can be reading the Tibetan master, and you'll read a whole paragraph, and then, whoa, he's talking about Aksobhya, about one of the Dhyani Buddhas and its mirror-like wisdom and what it represents for the initiate, who can achieve a certain level of mirror-like wisdom, reflecting the divinity through a perfected, calm mind. Mm-hmm. But most people would read the whole page and, well, this is interesting, but they wouldn't see that it's one of these sacred Buddhas. There are 5 celestial Buddhas that are responsible for the evolution of the planet. So it's a very esoteric. And the Alice Bailey teachings have a great deal in it, but a lot of hints. Mm-hmm. And you need a lot of, broader knowledge to sometimes penetrate. And one of the big keys is the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which scholars argue when it was written. Some say 10,000 years ago, sort of like the first self-help book ever, right? It is a book of, how would you call it? Technical directions, both psychologically for meditation and how to recognize what abilities start to awaken in you. It's outlined in 4 books. It's interesting. There's 4 books within the Yoga Sutras. There are 4 Gospels. It's interesting how certain numbers, one of the numbers that are constant is 5. A lot of people don't think about it. But in the Yoga Sutras, there are 5 states of the mind. There are 5 modifications of the mind. In Eso-Vajrayana Buddhism, there are 5 skandhas, which represent the psychology of the human mind. So 5 comes up a great deal, along with 7, of course. So there's a lot of fascination in the Bailey, but it takes years. When I met my teacher, the first thing he asked me, have I read Alice Bailey and Letters on Occult Meditation? I said, never heard of it. Well, I still study that book because of the depth and the knowledge. The real knowledge is hidden. It's available, but it's protected. And the real knowledge has to do with mantram. It is the most sacred. And in Letters on Occult Meditation, it outlines a great deal to give a person an idea. But mantra is very well hidden. I remember reading years ago when people started chanting, and especially when I was living in California. I remember being at a Shivananda ashram, and they chant all sorts of Hindu mantras and whatnot. Now, pretty much wondering. And then Psychology Today did an article about, what is mantra, right? So they had somebody chant, I guess, like a Shiva mantra, Om Shiva Namaya, and somebody go bread and butter, bread and butter, bread and butter, bread and butter. And they tried to read the different beta waves and different brain waves, and they saw no difference. But that's science. Science doesn't see what a real mantra is. A lot of people think it's just a bunch of words. But mantra, one secret, because it is written in one book, is the sound body of a deity. So when you, or deity, or let's call it an immortal being, because some mantras are related to very advanced souls. Say, like I mentioned before, Padmasambhava, he has a mantra, but he's not a deity. He's human of some sort, or was. He's beyond human. But then you have deities like Shiva or Vishnu or what have you, and they have mantra. So the mantra is actually an expression of them. There is no difference. Thus, our names, my name is Cyrus, Miguel, Moondog, Vance, that is our sound body. It represents us. So the Tibetan master and letters in occult meditation give all different examples of what mantra can do. I'll tell a little story. I read this book that was written in the 30s or 40s by Dr. Paul Brunton, and he had a particular experience in India. And my first trip in India, I'm walking down a street and a very tall Indian gentleman approaches me. Do you want your fortune told? No, not interested. No, come on. It's not very much, only a couple of rupees. Well, this is quite a few years ago. So, even 10 or 15 rupees, only a few pennies. Yeah, okay. So he takes me behind a building. We sit down, and he hands me a small little piece of paper. He says, write your mother's name on it. So I'm a bit of a smart aleck. I wrote mother, didn't write her name. I wrote mother, but I wrote it in script. I didn't print, I wrote. And he says, then fold it up 3 or 4 times. Well, I folded it up into a spitball as tight as I can. Holds out his hand. I put it in his hand. He closes his fist. Gives me another piece of paper, same size, blank, white, standard, paper. He says, fold it a couple of times this time, not into it, and hold it in your hand. Then he sits back, closes on here. He's chanting a mantra. He says, now open the paper I gave you. I opened it, and on that paper was the word mother in my handwriting. The only difference was on a different position. I wrote dead center. I'm very organized. It was up to the upper right or left, and that's what I read that happened to this Dr. Paul Brunton in his book, Search in Secret India. So he had a very slight magical power through mantra. What actually happens is he calls a small, what they call an elementary. That elementary has magical power, or conjuring powers, and can make that write on the paper that was closed in my hand, because they're an invisible being living on either the etheric or lower astral plane. Then he uses that. You see, I can do this. Now give me 100 rupees and I'll tell you. He said, nah, I'm not interested.
The upgrade, the upsell had to come in the spiritual world. Yeah, let me interrupt you real quick. Yeah, for the audience, if you have any questions for Cyrus, please super chat them. I guess, Vance, I see Graham. If Graham ever has a question, he's an equal to us, so let that one in. And yeah, I already see that a lot of the usual comments. about Alice Bailey and the UN, Lucius Trust, Annie Besant, people when it's Krishnamurti, you know, there's a lot of the usual sensationalistic stuff, Cyrus, especially people have said Alice Bailey was into social engineering and transhumanism. She was part of a more of nefarious stuff. What do you say when you hear those allegations?
It's just part of the game. One has to separate from the personality of the person giving the teaching and the quality of the teachings. There are a lot of different teachings out there, and one has to see whether those teachings are correct and fulfill the past traditions, the ancient traditions, and is in line. To give a simple story, there was this great Chinese saint. His name was Han Shan, 12th century or something. And one of his practices, for one day he was walking across a bridge and there was a waterfall, and then all of a sudden, it's in his book, he actually kept notes from the 12th century. And all of a sudden he said his mind just split open, the waterfall disappeared, everything disappeared, right? And he experienced this unity or whatever. But what does he do? He doesn't go around saying, hey, look, I had this is so good. He goes and checks the sutras to make sure that his experience is in line with the tradition, to make sure that he wasn't in illusion. So with all these different individuals, with Alice Bailey, HPB, I remember finding a book, I was out west somewhere, how Alice Bailey and Lord Maitreya are black magicians. These are just the norm of the occult. The occult has a very dark side, and that's unfortunate. A lot of people don't realize how the silent dark brothers infiltrate their minds. And in fact, the power of the dark brothers is much, much more powerful than people know. Thus, when H.P.B. Blavatsky wrote The Voice of the Silence, when you open the book, it says dedicated to the few. There's only a few who can actually penetrate into the depths. And that's frustrating to a lot of people. But that's under occult law. There are certain laws related to our planet. For instance, to give an example, I see online where people say, oh, you've got so many billionaires. If you took all their money, and even if they gave a half of it, which would be billions or trillions, it could feed the world. It could help humanity. It could do so much good, but it doesn't happen. It's never happened, and it never will happen, because there is a law of economy that only a certain percentage of wealth can be distributed. War, famine, disease is part of the existence of humanity. But we, now that we're in Libra, we're just about to leave Libra. Libra has to do with balance. People want peace. People want harmony. They want comforts. They want life to be better. But Libra is the balance through discordance, through difficulties, through conflict. Humanity works through conflict, searching for harmony and balance. And it is the conflicts that make the human the better human. Thus, you have the dark forces that are the forces that keep humanity down. If you read the Alice Bailey, the works, one has to have a very open mind. Like, I don't believe everything. I read with a very discerning mind, but some of it is fascinating. For instance, the second, Alice Bailey, or the Tibetan master, looks at the Second World War as one war from 1914 to 1945. It was a certain period, and he says that certain cosmic forces were allowed in. there's what's called a guardian wall of great beings. They're called Nirmanakaya, that prevent a certain degree of these cosmic forces from impacting on the earth that would bring a lot more turmoil than we have. But at a certain point, changes, the old world had to die, and a certain forces were allowed to impact on the planet. Thus, the war came. People think the war is like even what's going on now in the Middle East. You know, the Palestinians have been trodden down by the Israelis. The Israelis are afraid of another, what do they call it, cleansing, whatever. And they think it's not people. These are forces that are at work, okay, that ancient forces in some cases, especially in the Israeli-Palestinian thing, because there's always been war there. When has it been peaceful? Right? It's because of certain forces that have been asleep of dark magic that percolate. Anyways, so thus, because of these forces coming through, there's these wars. And through these wars, and humanity's pain and the tragedy of it, spiritually, they make progress and the world changes. But we all want peace, you know, and you just had like hurricanes in Florida, terrible hurricanes. People, you know, are devastated, everything. But that's all part of the world and its motion and movement. It doesn't look at us, the single human being. It looks at the motion and movement and the evolution of humanity as a great living center within the greater being people like to call God, or we call the solar logos, planetary logos, or the Rosicrucians call it the grand man of the heavens, or the heavenly man, that we are a center. So just like a human being, and people study yoga, have chakras, we have 7 chakras, major. The planetary being has 7 chakras also. And one of them is humanity within. And you think about this and ponder on it, it causes your mind to think in a much different level. Why, like the picture behind Moondog there, it's a galaxy. But that galaxy is a chakra within a much greater being. And it's a galaxy. The Tibetan master calls it the one about whom not may be said. The fascinating ideas, you know. And the whole thing with Alice Bailey is you have the teaching, not Alice Bailey herself. She's a, how do you call it, an advanced disciple who was able to see the works or hear and type down. So she's basically a scribe, an occult scribe. She's very different than Blavatsky. Blavatsky was an occultist. She had occult abilities. Mm-hmm. She could touch a rock and tell the history from that rock, right? And there was another, not people don't read a lot of her, but her one book, Light on the Path, has been in publication for 140 years and always sells, is Light on the Path, is Mabel Collins. She had occult abilities, and she helped Blavatsky, where you don't see that with the Alice Bailey Arcane School people with occult abilities. My teacher had occult abilities. You could walk into a room when he's there, and you could feel the room was different. He was a flavor chemist before he retired. He's passed away 15 years ago. And so he liked to cook because his ability to smell different flavors. So, but he would cook for a deity. In the kitchen, he had a little altar, and he'd make food for this particular deity. He'd cook it, offer it to the deity, chant a few mantra, then he'd feed you. And you could feel a stimulation from, how would you call food that's not highly flavorful, but not like when you take something that has a jalapeno in it and go, wow, it's really hot. But you would feel a stimulation and know that the deity has entered that food. And it would cause, if you're sensitive enough, a slight change in your mind. You could feel it. Not your brain, what they call in the Yoga Sutras your chitta. Your chitta is your total psychology, which relates to from the higher planes down to the lower planes. Chitta in English means mind stuff, that our minds is our material, very subtle material. You know, the psychologists today look at the brain, but they don't realize the brain is just a receiver. It is not the thinker. The thinker is on the inner plane, the higher mental plane. The true thinker in the human.
Yeah, so 1 second. Let me interrupt real quickly. Yeah, just wanted to mention again, if you have any super chats, please, or questions, please super chat us. We got Cyrus Ryan discussing Alice Bailey and Theosophy and some other great topics. I see there's a lot of cool puns in the chat right now, so that's good. Vance, let me bring you in. Do you have a question or remark?
Yeah, I've got several thoughts that I'd like to bring out here. Let's see, which one do I want to take? Do I want to take the weird one first? Well, here's something. If we humans and humanity didn't exist, say it was just what we usually call nature, animals and plants and so forth, what would be of these deities? Are they conscious? Would they, we sense them, those of us that are sensitive, but if we didn't exist, what of the existence of the deities?
Well, there's deities that are relative to the nature, as you call it. Okay. From theosophical teaching, many of these deities from past kalpas beyond time were human. There's always been a human. And that these deities, as it says in the ancient Kabbalah, from a rock to a plant to an animal to a human and then a god. Evolution has always been happening. This far out thought. As the Buddha says, samsara, or the world, has always been. There's no beginning, but there is an end. The end is when you become enlightened. But that's a Buddhist thought. So there's always been man. Man is a archetype. People are looking for life on other planets, SETI and stuff. It's very interesting. In Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, I ran across, I don't read it that often, but sometimes I use it as a reference book. And I came across a paragraph that she said, or The Secret Doctrine says, it's not Blavatsky. Life exists on every planet, but we have to adjust our concept of what life is. That's a far out thought.
Yeah.
Also, I was reading, I read it quite often, but some different parts, what's one of the first basis of Hindu culture, which is the Ramayana. In the Ramayana, there's this great evil being. His name is Ravana. But he travels around in I have trouble with the word, poop. It's called the Vimana. There's a name to it. Mm-hmm. But it is described, and this Ramayana is 8,000 years old, as a silver disc that even has a door with stairs that many people, and it can expand and travel by thought. So Ravana could travel anywhere. He was like the Lord of the world at that time. And this Vimana Pushpakakata, something, it's a weird word, but the Vimana. And that these beings have these silver discs Now, quite a number of years ago, before I read that, and then now I think about this, I met this young boy, very young, who was a conscious channel at that time for some Davic forces, angelic forces. I lost touch with him, and I think things changed when he got older. And he said, do you know what many of these UFOs are? They are the bodies of interdimensional beings. That's why they shift forms and can move at such rates. And then when I read this from the Ramayana about these Vimanas as silver discs, click, very fascinating.
Well, you must be psychic for sure, because that was my next question. Remember when I said I was going to come up with something weird?
So it's a good possibility. For instance, because people don't have a lot of clairvoyant knowledge. Long time ago, I read that book, Communion by
Whitley Strieber.
About his first experience of alien abduction. So I'm reading it, and he's talking about seeing these little gray beings coming at him. And I can't remember the exact in the book because it's in the 80s when I read it, or whenever it came out. And then I recognized, I said, those aren't aliens. He's having a low astral experience. He's on the lower astral plane. These are astral beings. So because I've experienced that, so what? But he wrote a book and made a good living.
Yeah.
Right? Misinformation. And that brings us back to a lot of what Miguel asked about all these different Alice Bailey people who deride Bailey. They don't have correct knowledge, and they like guessing. And unfortunately, in our world, we enjoy negative emotions. We like to tear things apart. If you want to be an occultist, you have to destroy all your negative emotions. You have to rise above the negative thought forms of the lower astral plane, lower mental plane. And many of these people like to buy into this because it makes them feel good, when in fact they don't realize how much they're hurting themselves, creating negative karma against those positive forces related to the spiritual evolution of humanity. Unfortunately, a lot of them are Christian or mislaid Christian concepts, how people love poor Jesus, whoever he was. He has to be rolling over and wherever he exists with the way people think. The real Jesus was an advanced initiate used by a greater being for 3 years. Theosophy would call that the world teacher, who is a great being who encapsulates all of humanity into his being. Thus, when he says, verily, when you do it unto the least, you do it unto me, because he holds all of humanity in his heart, so to speak. And so there is no such thing as you have to be careful if these people get really upset. Jesus Christ, there's a master Jesus and an expression of the divine Christos through this being called the world teacher. Mm-hmm. People like to call it Lord Maitreya. He may have, but different names throughout history. But he always manifests whenever times become difficult, as it says in the Bhagavad Gita when Lord Krishna is the same being, right, as this great being. Buddhism, they call it Chenrezig, right? Different names, the Kalki avatar or whatever in Hinduism. But yes,
in America, we call him Elvis.
Yeah, it's great. So at least they have. Well, at least America has a lot of good humor. So
you have to. It's so crazy down here.
Before you were talking about humanity, and when I asked a question about, what would deities be without humanity, from your description, it suddenly occurred to me that humanity as a whole, which always has been, is actually another deity. It's like a traveling deity that travels among the universe of other deities.
Well, in
That
one respect,
explores and develops,
you're correct. Humanity as a totality is
Yeah.
overshadowed by a great being who is the guardian of all humanity. But then there are all these, what they call masters of wisdom, because of the vastness of humanity, the eras, the cultures, etc. So there are different masters of wisdom related to the different times, periods, cultures, etc. In Hinduism, they call it the Manu, the Bodhisattva, and the Mahachohan. These are great beings. We can't even think of what they are because they encapsulate such great vast periods of time. We live for what, 80 years, maybe 100 years, where these beings may live for hundreds of thousands of years. For them, we as an individual are like a spark of light, and it's over. They live for kalpas. As I was reading something from the Master Cage, I think the Mahatma letters, that these great devas or archangels, 1,000 years is like a second. We've lived and died, and they've 1,000 years gone. So they don't have conception of us as individuals. It's only, and this is an occult law, only when you raise yourself to their level that you impact on them. But if you're the normal, if you take the Gurdjieff Uspensky concepts, I don't know if you guys have ever read The Fourth Way, Gurdjieff, mechanical sleeping humanity, like in the Matrix,
Right.
they don't count. So a tsunami comes and wipes out 3,000, or bomb falls or whatever, and everybody's praying, oh God, God, why is this happening? They don't count in the physical sense because these beings are of such a high level. Those that count are those that can raise their consciousness and then commune or impact on their consciousness. It's a very harsh concept. The other harsh concept is everything happens in the world exactly as it's meant to happen. So take a terrible thing like that shooting in, where is it, in Texas, where the police waited around for a couple hours and now they're investigating.
Oh, Valdi, yeah.
Valdi, that's it. Terrible, terrible thing. But it happened exactly as it was meant to happen, because mechanical man is impacted by certain forces, karmic forces. Certain things have to happen. As much as we hate it, but from the occult awakened point of view, you see this. And by the pain that causes, it should awaken your compassion and your caring for humanity, to help humanity. Thus, Miguel, you having this podcast is a means to reach out to people, to help people, writing your book, etc. People have to know, even if they take the truth and dice it up and put it into a wok and it comes out as chop suey, but that's the beginning. That's the baby steps. And as you said, those negative attacks on aliens, they're not ready. They're not evolved enough spiritually to understand the correct direction. And that's why it's only a few. Like there's only a few billionaires. Wealth cannot be spread out. Esoteric teaching cannot, the deeper it's kept secret, cannot be spread out. But it has to be, and then people slowly evolve into it, life after life. So it's a vast, vast thing. We are nothing. We have to be humble and make our efforts and help people who want help and still live and make a living and enjoy life.
Yeah, Vance, did you see that question by Graham? I was able to star it, but I can pull
No,
it up. Okay.
it's
Here's one from our other wingman and a supporter. That's from Graham Pong, and this question is for you. Can you comment on Theosophy's root races with strange reproduction like Hyperboreans budding and Lemurians laying eggs?
No, not a great deal. I have to admit, because let's look at it in this way. One, I didn't study a great deal about the Hyperborean Lemuria. They're interesting. One of the questions I know Miguel had, and I'll get back to this, I'm not avoiding the question, I'm just scooting around a little bit.
Yeah, no problem.
That Miguel had was about the deeper occult and the lower occult.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, the interest in root races, Atlantis, Lemuria, fascinating. But that is what they call Shakti, or energy moving outwards,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you could picture it as if you had an invisible TV in front of you and you create a thought form of interest and your life force is going there. That doesn't build what they call the inner soul.
Right.
It's interesting. It makes your mind think a little bit different, right? The higher occult is where you learn how to, you find the Holy Grail within you and hold the blood of the Christ to build a receptacle, to hold the blood of the Christ within you. The blood is the divine Shakti, the food of the divine, and how you isolate it from whichever aspect of the logos that you belong to. Blavatsky calls it the star that you belong to. But that's what they call a blind. Okay, it's made like a riddle, so you have to figure it out. It has nothing to do with the star. And hold that and build a receptacle. In the Gurdjieff teaching, that's when you attune to, he calls it the higher batteries. He uses another term, I just can't think of it at the moment. But as if there's a great battery and you have a small battery, you connect to this higher battery, and that gives you this extra force within you. Then you build up within yourself. So, like, I don't know anything, it is written, and I don't talk in my teachings with my students too much about the root races. Part of the reason there's so much difficulty with racisms, and people don't understand the races, and Hitler ruined the whole concept of the Aryan race by making, his concept. Again, that's twisted occultism. He was a powerful left-hand path occultist. But it was interesting. He was also possessed by one of these great asuras. It was actually a journalist that noticed when they first met Hitler his power. Mm-hmm. And then they somehow had an opportunity, met him near the end of the war, and he had no power. It's like this force left him. Anyway, so I don't talk a great deal. As the Hyperborean race being the second race, when man was more ephemeral, more ghost-like, more etheric. And so it was not human in the sense that we are human. And the same with the Lemurian until the third root race. Supposedly it is written, and I don't know it because I've not experienced it. It was during the third root race that the great beings, we are told, who brought mind, again in the Greek mythology, fire to humanity. The fire was the fire of mind, because mind is related to the mental plane, which is tejas. Tejas means fire in Sanskrit. So it's the fire of mind, because mind, in its real sense, causes transformation, as fire on the physical plane will transform wood into, burn it into nothing. So it's the transformative. And that happened in the third root race. And the humanity of that time needed hatha yoga in order to coordinate the physical being. Whether they had eggs, prior to that, more on it was animal man, is a possibility. But within the womb of a woman, if she goes through periods when there's the gestation, it goes through almost the plant animal stage, etc. So who knows? It's a possibility. And then eventually you have the Atlantean after the Lemurian. There are a great deal of the Atlanteans still existing on the planet, and very little of the Lemurian, but there are remnants that still exist. But whether they laid egg, I don't know.
No worries.
It's not of great value to know that for me, because it doesn't do anything to build my inner awareness. I'm more, and the way I teach is to answer the question of man, know thyself, of Hermes Trismegistus. Who am I? Okay, what they call Atma Vichara, self-inquiry. If you read, I say on the internet, Sri Ramana Maharishi was a great saint in southern India, died in 1950 or something. And this whole teaching is, who am I? But the I within us is a multitude. It's finding the right I.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we didn't show any of the pictures. For instance,
I can bring it up if you'd like.
There's the one.
Let's see, where is the
Not that. That's time.
Okay.
This one.
Okay.
This is a picture drawn by my teacher. In essence, this is only a part. There's a little bit above it that shows one way of analyzing. It's a blending of theosophical thought and the fourth way of the Gurdjieff Ouspensky teaching, showing that you can see this two little squares, the intellect and the emotion. They relate to centers or vortices within our chitta. The semicircle, which is also called the Physica Pisces, that surrounds it, and you can see the word chitta, that is our total psychology. Modern psychology only looks at the intellect and the emotions. But what a lot of people don't realize, we have a movement, instinctive, and sexual centers of vortices within our chitta. The movement center on its lower aspect is responsible for the blood circulating, heart beating. We breathe, we don't think about it. So it's in the subconscious, right? Where the intellect and the emotions is more in a relative conscious mind, because we think we're thinking. But many of our thoughts are driven by the emotion, the movement center. So sometimes you sit down, you want to meditate, or you go to sleep and you put your head on the pillow, and all of a sudden there's all these thoughts moving, and we wonder how to stop. It's the movement center, which is driven by the sex center, which is the most powerful force in the human being. There's the most secret teaching has to do with sound, but it also has to do with the sex center, not in the physical aspect of sex, but the transformative aspect of sex, because sex causes transformation, right? It causes the continuance of the race, the transformation and bringing a new life into the world. It is the creative power of the universe that dwells within our two lower chakras, the Svadhisthana and the Muladhara. Related to it's called Kundalini, but the real idea of Kundalini is a great secret. Once I was at a lecture and a guy's talking all this stuff about Kundalini, and I raised my hand and I just asked him, well, does a frog have Kundalini? And like he just stopped dead. Huh? Because it doesn't understand what Kundalini is. Of course a frog has Kundalini. Otherwise it wouldn't live. Everything that lives has Kundalini.
Pepe's happy.
Pardon?
Oh, there's a frog named Pepe on the internet. Yeah. He would be happy then. Kermit, whoever you want to talk about.
Yes, exactly. So this particular Mandela, this part, if you meditate and know the secrets of this Mandela, the amount of knowledge is in this is beyond books. Right? And even in the Gurdjieff teaching, he only writes a little bit. My teacher, as an initiate, was able to delve deeply and came up with and developed these particular teaching methods. It shows the soul. A secret, the Tibetan master gives it out a bit, but people see it, they read it, but they don't know it. Certain secrets can be put directly in front of you, as is this diagram, and they can't see it. Because if you're not ready to understand it, it's not there. The main secret here is that the soul is dual. There's a soul on the higher mental plane, usually the second or third subplane, and the soul, a portion of it, dwells within us. And it is this portion that has to be found. So from the Latin, you have persona, which means to hide. So our personalities hide this portion of the soul. It is this portion of the soul that has to be found. One has to be able to blend their consciousness with it. And it is this portion of us that undergoes an initiation, the real initiations, not the personality. And so the 5-pointed star that you see at the center, the upper point represents consciousness, meaning, and the other 4 points relate to the elements, is that consciousness has to control the elements. When in fact, now, Gurdjieff teaching, mechanical man, the elements control consciousness. Thus, the star is inverted for humanity. But that's one of the deeper teachings. Give an example. If you want to bring up another, the one that has the little train on it.
Little train.
We brought that up before.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the horizontal one.
That's it.
That other one looked like a tree of life. Is there any relation, or is that just a coincidence?
No, there is relation. The tree of life can be blended with what's called Atma Vidya, which is the basis of Theosophy. When Blavatsky was asked, what is Theosophy? She said, Atma Vidya. So there are 4 great teachings in ancient Indias, or Vidyas. There's Mahavidya, which is magics. There's Guhya Vidya, which is the secret teachings on sound. And there's Yajna Vidya, which is the teaching of ritual. And then there's Atma Vidya. And Atma Vidya includes the other 3. So the tree of life is basically Atma Vidya. This is just a favorite teaching of me about the past, the so-called present, and the future. People think the past, like you're on a train, you were in New York, presently you're in Chicago. New York is the past. It doesn't exist. It's memory. You're going to LA, it's the future. You have thoughts and impressions of what LA may be, but you've never been there. You've read or whatever, but you still don't know. It's the future. Anything can happen. You're presently in Chicago. Actually, right now, at least one of you is very close to Chicago. Therefore, does the past exist? There's a secret teaching that has to do with, in order to attain liberation, you have to know how to incarnate in the past. Well, how can you do that if you're dead, if the past is dead? Mm-hmm. So the train track represents linear time. You know, you're Monday, you're in New York, Tuesday going through Detroit, and Wednesday you're in Chicago, linear. And by Friday, you'll be in Los Angeles. Linear time, which we live in. But if you are in the space shuttle or some such thing, 200 miles above the Earth, directly above Chicago, at the same time that train is in Chicago. The being in the spaceship can see New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles now. So for him, the past, New York, is not the past. It's the present, the so-called now. So the concept of past, present, and the future is relative to one's psychological time. Time can be linear or vertical. If you can enter into vertical time, your relationship with the past, present, and future changes. A lot of people enjoy that because we don't realize that the past is the engine that runs the present. And the present creates the future. And within this line of time, there are parallel lines. And when one is at a station, is only the time you have free will to make changes in one's life. But that's not included in this diagram. This is in my first book, Living on the Inner Edge. You can get it on Amazon, but a lot of what we're discussing and some of these ideas are in that book. And those diagrams, like the one I just showed, is from that book. And I discuss a little bit about time and dimension. One has to enter vertical time. Sometimes we actually do. So the last diagram we were talking, and it showed that little sex center. It had the 5 centers. So for instance, the sex center controls time. Remember, think of a time maybe when you're a teenager or whoever, and you're going on your first date. And the first date, you're being picked up. A bunch of your friends are going, and they're coming in 5 minutes. And you're pacing up and down and looking at your clock. Time seems to be forever, and yet it's 5 minutes. That's your the emotional part of your sex center that's agitated and wanting it to happen. Then, excuse me, you go on your date, and before you know it, you're home. Time just snaps, is gone. Again, that's that center in the movement center, and you touch a little bit of vertical time because time stops being linear. And yet you're picked up at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, you're home by 12. It was linear time, but your psychological thought about it, you don't think about it, but how you felt is different. But because we are sleeping humanity, we don't think much about that. But time is conditioned by thought. Time and consciousness are blended. Time is consciousness in a way. So, what is the I don't know if there's any other questions.
No question. There's a couple of diagrams. I don't know if you would like to address them or not.
It depends what you think. I don't know what they are. Those are my.
Well, I do have a question, actually, because I think it's an overarching theme, Cyrus. We're talking about reading and studying and history and all that. But as you said, and I would agree, at the end of the day, what are the exercises you're going to do to expand your consciousness and go to that wordless place? So what advice or what kind of rituals do you suggest or do you teach to, like you said, the inner occultism, the inner journey?
True. That is what is the most important.
Agreed.
Like the great saint, India's greatest yogi, known as Milarepa, he says, what good are words? Practice. So he's of the practice succession, or the Kargu whispered lineage of great occultists. And he was an occultist also. So in my book, I don't know if I show a picture of it. Whoops.
There you go. Living, yeah.
I'm trying to get it. I'm doing a lousy job.
Where's your camera?
Okay. Just put it in front of your face,
and bring
it back. There you go.
Living under the
living on the inner edge.
There you go.
There are a lot of several exercises. So the first
good.
thing, my exercise, they're not mine, are based on the Yoga Sutras. The first, what's called the inner yoga, is called pratyahara, how to withdraw your consciousness to a center point. So the way I teach is you visualize your body is hollow and empty, filled with golden light, and then focus. It could be on I use a flame in the lotus of the heart. But you can use the sun, you can put the Buddha, you can put a cross, your choice, depending on what suits you. But you have to visualize it, and it becomes steady. But then there are thoughts, forces of resistance that are constantly moving, because your energy is normally going outwards. You have to learn how to pull it inward. Thus, discipline, meditate. When I first started, I did start with the flame, and I meditate once a day, maybe once every other day. But over the years, and it was twice a day, and sometimes 3 times. Now, I generally meditate 2 to 3 times a day and spend 4 to 5 hours meditating. I'm forced to. I'm retired now, so I can do that. But even when I worked, and I had a full-time job, worked for an American company, traveled anyways. So focusing on the flame within the body, hollow and empty. Watching the breath. So if your breath becomes like that, you're trying too hard. The breath should be like silk, that you almost not noticeable. And in time, by focusing on the flame, then by sounding the Om gently, like Om, by visualizing the flame, then you inhale, hold your breath for a slight second, then project your breath into the flame and feel the flame as you go, Om, radiate upwards and expand. Now, in Letters on Occult Meditation, the Alice Bailey by Tibetan Master gives a great deal of what happens by sounding the Om correctly. He says it's very difficult and very few people do. He's very truthful. People don't like reading that. When he puts out that very few people are successful at this. But you have to blend the breath, the thought. You have to feel as the flame expands that you're aspiring upwards. The Om pushes out unwanted negative astral substance and builds in positive higher substance. But you have to blend the breath, the thought, and the visualization at the same time. Everything, you have the number 3 and the number 7s. 3 is the creative number. So you have to apply the creative force, breath, thought, and visualization with the sound all together to make it creative. And you do, when I teach, we do the sound, 4 loud, 4 silent. This reason is that if you just sit in silence, most of the time you fall asleep, not knowing you fell asleep, thinking, I had a great meditation, but you were sound asleep, right? And you can't try too hard. You have to be natural. So you focus inwards. Then one of the meditation, then we do that. Then another thought that's difficult for people is you cannot do it by yourself. Even the Buddha, if you read the Buddha Sutras, he doesn't say, this is what I think. He says, thus have I heard. Or I follow in the footsteps of those who come before me. That's the way of humility. You have to look to a higher being. So we pray or make an obeisance to the masters of wisdom. So for instance, with my book, that symbol, not known yet, but this is a hierarchical symbol. It has the entire teaching. You've got the circle, which represents the ring pass knot. The triangle represents the 3. Then there are 7 parts in the triangle. That's the 7, the the creative principles. So you've got the creative and the manifest. So the 3, the 10, which makes the perfect 7 and 3, the 10, and the totality. The upper triangle represents the world of the gods, or Hiranyagarbha. Ishvara. The next is Hiranyagarbha, and then our physical plane, Vaisvanara. But this was given to me psychically back in 1977. It took me 20 years to figure out what it was.
Wow.
It was given to me. I used it just to sign my paintings. You can see some behind me. I thought it was something given to me to use as an occult symbol for my signature until I figured out. Anyway, so you can even visualize that symbol. It's alive on the higher planes if you can contact it. But so you have to have some aspect of deity that you may, and then you can picture that deity in that lotus and sound the Om. Because we do an obeisance, we do obeisance to the divine masters of wisdom, the divine Nirmanakaya, on the path of love, light, and power, who through great compassion serve and protect humanity. To thee we pay our deepest obeisance, and then we sound the Om. Because that way you're being humble and asking for help from a greater beings. That is very important, right? If you want to do it to the divine Christ, we also do to the world teacher. We go obeisance to divine Lord, Maitreya, the world teacher, divine Bodhisattva of love, sacrifice, and power, teacher of both angels and of men. We pay our deepest. Again, being humble. And then after that, go back to the flame, center, sounding the Om, and then asking, who am I? Who am I without body and without form? And then try and just feel the flame. I'm an eternal soul, a sacred flame within the greater divine flame. And then radiate the Om again. Also in my book, I give out a meditation on the 5 Dhyani Buddhas. So when you get more advanced, you want to visualize a mandala. Many, you've seen Tibetan mandalas and things like that. So you picture there's 5 Dhyani Buddhas, and you enter the mandala. You have in front of you Aksobhya Buddha, who's a deep blue in color. Behind you, we have Amitabha Buddha, who's flaming red like the setting sun. On your right, Ratnasambhava Buddha, golden in color. On the left is Amoghasiddhi Buddha, emerald green. And above you is Vajrayana, who's blazing white like the noonday sun. And these Buddhas have certain representations, but they become a protecting mandala, and you build up the knowledge of these Buddhas. I remember I had a student and sent me a note, said, I was sitting in the doctor's office and they kept me waiting. I got so bored, I decided to do my meditation. I started doing the Dhyani Buddhas, and one of them came alive for me. And it came huge. And that's like a certain type of blessing, that you're connecting with this archetype of our planetary system of these Dhyani Buddhas. So those are 2 of the meditations that I teach. What I do is very different, but that's what I did. But the flame and developing a center of awareness so you can separate from your personality consciousness and your physical consciousness is key. And as I said before, to create the, what did I use? The cup, what was the cup of Christ? What, the holy grail within you. The cup is within you. It's not some cup you're looking for in History Channel. And stuff. It is a very esoteric symbol to be able to hold the divine Shakti. So in Tibetan Buddhism, they call it building an inner Maya Varupa, an inner form that holds this Shakti with your essential nature, which is called the Swarupa, the real form. When you have that, then you start to develop more clairvoyant, psychic powers, if you wish. You also can have different, what they call siddhis, because you can hold this spiritual thing. But then if you spill it, it's interesting, to build a building takes months or a year, but they can destroy it in what, a second? Dynamite it?
Yeah.
As above, so below. You do the wrong thing, get carried away, and this holy grail smashes, and you have to rebuild it. It's an unfortunate thing. So therefore, that's why the yogis of old always stayed in caves or in jungles, because it was too difficult because of the forces around them that they could slip, right? You read the ancient, I was reading about this ancient, what they call Maharishi, Rajarishi, Vishvakarma, no, not Vishvakarma. I can't remember his name. And Indra, the Lord of Heaven, started to get jealous and see that he's getting too much powerful. His holy grail was radiating fire and power. So he sent down an Aspara, the most gorgeous, beautiful, to try and lure him away. And because she was so beautiful, he actually forgot and spent a couple of years with her, and then clicked on him. He said that was a trick of Indra. And then he had to go back and do another 1,000 years of meditation. Right? So it's the same, as above, so below. If you don't watch this substance that you build up, and the trouble is, as you build more, then you become open to these dark brothers. They want it because it's valuable. It's the same. A long time ago, I do art. I was a designer for a very high-end jeweler. And they need diamonds, and things would move around the city to get them placed. They go to setters and polishers and whatnot. So you would think they would move the diamonds, that sometimes they'd have a whole batch of worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in an armored truck. They had a bicycle courier.
Jesus.
Why? The jeweler I worked for, he knew a little bit about the occult. If it's in a big truck, it appears safe, but it's a target. Who's going to look at a bicycle courier?
Yeah, what do they have? A Subway sandwich or something? Yeah, nobody cares, right?
Right. And he'd be carrying hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of gems.
Wow.
It is the same with the occult. That's why Gurdjieff called it, you have to become the sly man, because you don't want to be noticed. You start to gain power, but if you become too noticed and visible, you can be attacked. Okay.
Makes sense. Awesome. Well, we are getting towards the end of this wonderful conversation. Vance, do you have any last question or remark?
Oh, there's no last questions on this subject.
Yeah.
Good point.
Tap into your higher soul for that one good question.
But I will point out the Gnostics have a concept called the aeons, which sound a lot like some of the deities and so forth that you were describing. And the Dark Brothers are the archons. So I think, the Gnostic Christians of old probably had a parallel teaching to a lot of what the Theosophists had. There's so many different systems.
Exactly. No, but you're correct. It's the same. All the Greek deities are Hindu deities. They've just been transferred over. And the Romans are all Hindu. Right. And great many of it's the same with the Egyptian. Mother Isis, Tara, or Kali. It's all the same. Just the form and the packaging changes relative to the culture and the time. The Egyptian is very different. Egyptian is very powerful. Different than the Buddhist. Buddhist is a different type of power Egypt. So sometimes I could tell some interesting stories of attacks, but you start to say you're being attacked and you have your favorite deity, you invoke it, and it's not working. You go, crap, what's going on? I'm being pounded on my head. Then I know a particular Egyptian, it's like a formula. You have to know which antidote works. And the beauty with Theosophy is it's synthetic. You're not just Hindu, you're not just Buddhist. You can be Rosicrucian, Hindu, Buddha, all combined together. And I even did the Norse gods. I have paintings of Odin and new mantras for Odin. Very strange, but they exist, but they're relative to a certain period and purpose. Odin and Thor, they exist. Right? It's the same.
Unified theory.
Yeah,
Yep.
but they have their place. So if God, let's say, is a diamond has many facets. Each facet represents a different teaching. It's all part of the one diamond, but yet it's a separate facet. So you have a Buddhist facet, Hindu facet, Taoist facet, Nordic facet, what have you. It has its own individuality. It seems different, but in fact, it's not.
Amen to that. Yes, and we have let's see, I think I saw a super chat from Mike Frank. Thanks for Cyrus, Miguel. Most of us will never hear this wisdom. The proof is in the cities. And I agree very much. Yeah. And thank you for your support. As we get to the end, I have it on the show notes, but where do you want to send people to learn more about you? I'm assuming it's Northern School of Esoteric Wisdom.com. Is that it, Cyrus?
Yes.
Where you want to send people?
Yeah. And we never charge any money, donations. We only exist by people making their offerings through gratitude. One of the first teachings is called Dana Paramita, the perfection of giving. One has to know how to give. You can buy my book again.
And is your book at the website or usual?
Yeah, it's on the website. You can't buy it. It directs you to Amazon or something. There is a great deal in that book, and it's not easy. It includes Buddhism, Yoga Sutras, Fourth Way of Gurdjieff.
Wow.
Great deal. Plus various experiences. I never even got into the experiences I had in caves in India, where I saw a bat that was the size of a small airplane. But that was on the inner plane and what happened there and things like that.
Wow.
It's in the book.
Very exciting. It's in the book?
Yes.
All right. Well, we'll have to check it out. Well, we are at the end for an excellent conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But Vance, first I'll say goodbye to you. Thanks for keeping us company.
Oh, this was great. Hey, Cyrus, I think you're on to something.
Yeah. You ain't whistling Dixie, as they say in the South, huh?
Right, exactly.
There you go.
That was great. I really appreciate it, and it was fun.
Yes, Cyrus, we really appreciate you coming on the show, sharing your wisdom, techniques, and everything else to make a difference. So you heard it. Of course, I will have his link on the show notes, whether you're watching on video or podcast. So click that link and check out his work, check out his book. And for everybody else, as always, appreciate you being here. Please support Aeon Byte in any way you can. Like, subscribe, share, join the Patreon. One-time donations, anything you can do to keep the lights of the pleroma on. And great shows next week and some cool, scary shows before Halloween is over. So that's it on my end. As I always say, write your own gospel, live your own myth, and at the very least, enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a good weekend. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.